The emerald silk robe my mother was buried in was still warm when I found another woman wearing it. I could smell my mom's lavender perfume on her skin. And then I saw my inheritance, a sapphire ring sliding onto her finger. My father didn't stop her. He watched me bleed from where she shoved me against the wardrobe. And then he whispered the words that broke my brain. He'd been sleeping with her for a decade. Now, the sirens are screaming in the driveway. In exactly 4 minutes, the police will crest the hill to arrest me for trespassing in my own childhood home. My father is standing over a pile of burning documents, smiling as the evidence of my mother's life turns to ash. I am trapped, disinherited, and labeled insane by the only man I ever trusted. But they don't know what I found in the service tunnels. Let me take you back to how this nightmare actually began. The door creaked against the thick pile of the Persian rug. Sarah froze. Diane stood by the vanity, the hem of Elena's emerald silk robe pooling around her ankles like spilled oil. The scent of Elena's Bulgarian rose perfume hung heavy and cloying in the stagnant air, butchered by the sharp metallic tang of Diane's cigarette smoke. Sarah's lungs burned with the effort of holding her breath. This room, once a sanctuary of soft lavender and whispered lullabies, now felt like a stage set for an intruder. Diane raised her right hand, tilting it so the morning light caught the heirloom sapphire. The deep blue stone winked mockingly from Diane's pale, nicotine-stained finger. It looked bloated and wrong against skin it didn't belong to. The ring had been a fixture of Sarah's childhood, a glimmering promise of a legacy that was supposed to be hers. "Take it off," Sarah commanded. Her voice came out thin, a dry rattle in her throat. She stepped further into the room, her leather heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the exposed hardwood border. Diane didn't flinch. She traced the gold filigree of the band with a manicured nail, the screech of her file-honed tip against the metal setting Sarah's teeth on edge. "It's a bit snug," Diane murmured, eyes fixed on her own reflection. Elena always had such bird-like bones. Pity they snapped so easily. The cruelty of the remark hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're stretching the shoulders," Sarah said, her fingers twitching toward the heavy crystal carafe on the nightstand. "Put the ring on the dresser and step out of those clothes. Now." Diane hummed a flat, tuneless note. She adjusted the silk belt, tightening it until the fabric puckered. "Your father said it suited me. He told me stagnant things deserve new life." She flashed a smile that failed to reach her eyes, showing a hint of lipstick on a front tooth. The sapphire glowed, a cold, stolen star in the dim room. "Sarah is standing in the master suite," Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for the digital recorder in her pocket. "The subject is wearing the decedent's clothing. The subject is refusing to return the sapphire ring." Diane's eyes flickered to Sarah's lapel. "Still talking to your little machine, Sarah? It's a bit pathetic, don't you think? Recording your own displacement? The record does not lie, Diane. You are an intruder. This house, this jewelry, none of it belongs to you." Sarah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She needed the ring. It was the only physical link left to the mother who had died in her arms just 4 weeks ago. Every second Diane wore it felt like a fresh desecration. The tension in the room was a living thing, thick as the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. Sarah moved toward the vanity, her hand outstretched. But Diane stepped back, the silk of the robe hissing against the floor. The air smelled of stolen luxury and the bitter ash of the present. The heavy oak door swung open with a force that rattled the crystal perfume bottles on the vanity. Michael Sterling stepped into the room, his presence immediately sucking the air out of the space. He was a man built of sharp angles and expensive wool, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture as rigid as a marble monument. He didn't look at Sarah. His eyes went straight to Diane, softening in a way that made Sarah's stomach churn. "Michael?" Diane purred, her voice shifting into a helpless, melodic trill. She moved toward him, the emerald silk shimmering. "Sarah is being difficult again. She's demanding the ring." Sarah felt the familiar rush of heat to her face. "It's Mom's ring, Dad. You know she wanted me to have it. You told me when I was 10 that it was my inheritance." Michael checked his heavy platinum watch, tapping the face with his ring finger. Tap, tap, tap. He looked at Sarah then, his eyes as cold and gray as a November Atlantic. "Sarah is experiencing a lapse in memory," he said, speaking as if she weren't in the room, his voice a deep, resonant baritone designed for courtrooms and boardrooms. "For the sake of the family legacy, we need to clarify the history of this piece." "There's nothing to clarify," Sarah snapped. "It was Mom's. She wore it every day for 20 years. Michael took a slow, measured breath. "You're remembering it through a very dark lens, darling. Grief has a way of twisting the facts. The truth is quite different." He stepped closer to Diane, resting a possessive hand on her shoulder. "I bought that sapphire for Diane 6 years ago during a trip to Paris. I asked Elena to keep it in her jewelry box because I wasn't ready to go public with our relationship. It was never hers. It was always a gift for the woman who truly understood me." The world tilted. Sarah felt the floorboards beneath her feet turn to water. 6 years. Her mother had been alive, struggling through the first shadows of her illness, while her father was buying heirlooms for a mistress. The betrayal was a jagged blade, cutting through every childhood memory Sarah held dear. The secret affair wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a systematic erasure of her mother's dignity. "You're lying," Sarah whispered, her hand trembling as she gripped the recorder. "Sarah is recording a false statement. The subject is claiming the sapphire was a gift for the mistress. This contradicts 20 years of visual evidence." Michael didn't blink. "The data does not support your emotional conclusion, Sarah. There is no record of that ring in your mother's estate papers, because it didn't belong to her. It belongs to Diane. Now, I suggest you go to your room and find some composure. You are embarrassing the Sterling name." Sarah's vision blurred. The man standing before her wasn't her father. He was a stranger who had spent years curating a lie. The sapphire winked from Diane's finger, no longer a symbol of love, but a trophy of a long conquest. The silence that followed Michael's revelation was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Sarah's gaze darted between her father's mask of indifference and Diane's triumphant smirk. The jewelry box, a heavy rosewood chest with velvet lining, sat open on the vanity, a graveyard of her mother's memories. "I don't believe you," Sarah said, her voice regaining a hard, metallic edge. She lunged for the vanity, her fingers clawing for the jewelry box. If she couldn't have the ring, she would take the rest. She wouldn't let this woman touch another piece of her mother's life. Diane was faster. She intercepted Sarah with a sharp, bird-like movement, her hands catching Sarah's wrists. The strength in the older woman's grip was shocking. "It's mine now, sweetie," Diane hissed, her breath smelling of lemon water and malice. They struggled, a clumsy, desperate dance in the middle of the room. Sarah felt the silk of the robe, her mother's robe, snag against her watch. She shoved upward, trying to break Diane's hold, but Diane used Sarah's momentum against her. With a sharp, practiced twist, Diane sent Sarah stumbling backward. Sarah's shoulders slammed into the heavy mahogany wardrobe. The impact was a dull, bone-jarring thud that sent a bloom of white-hot pain through her arm. She slumped against the dark wood, gasping for air. The smell of scorched dust and old wax filled her nose as she slid toward the floor. Diane stood over her, breathing heavily, her honey-blonde hair finely mussed. She held the jewelry box against her chest like a shield. "You're unstable, Sarah," Diane said, her voice returning to that sweet, patronizing lilt. "Look at you, attacking your father's wife in her own bedroom. It's tragic, really." Michael stood by the window, his back to them, counting the stairs in his head even though he wasn't moving. 1, 2, 3, he whispered under his breath. He didn't turn around to see if his daughter was hurt. He had already erased the incident from his version of the truth. Sarah gritted her teeth, the pain in her shoulder throbbing in time with her heartbeat. She looked down and saw Diane's purse lying open on the floor, knocked over during the scuffle. A white envelope peeked out from the designer leather, postmarked from a small town in Ohio, a place Diane claimed she had never even heard of. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah reached out and swiped the envelope, stuffing it into her waistband before Diane could notice. She used the wardrobe to pull herself to her feet, her legs shaking. "Sarah is leaving the room," she murmured into her lapel, her voice a jagged shard of glass. "The subject has committed physical assault. Evidence has been secured." She didn't look back as she limped toward the door, the weight of the stolen letter a cold, sharp promise against her skin. The hallway felt miles long. Sarah's leather heels, usually so confident, now sounded like a funeral march against the polished floor. She made it to the privacy of her own room, locking the door and collapsing against it. Her breath came in ragged gulps. She pulled the envelope from her waistband. It was a utility bill, addressed to a Diane Vance at an address in Oak Haven, Ohio. The date on the bill was from only 3 months ago, the same time Diane had claimed to be summering in the Hamptons when she first met Michael. The lie was a physical thing now, something Sarah could hold. Diane wasn't a socialite. She was someone else entirely. Sarah pulled out her recorder, her thumb hovering over the play button. "Sarah has evidence," she whispered. "The paper trail begins in Oak Haven. The mistress is a fabrication. The father is a collaborator. The record will be corrected." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane in its frame. The Sterling estate, with its manicured gardens and stopped clocks, felt less like a home and more like a tomb. But Sarah wasn't ready to be buried yet. She sat on the edge of her bed, the stolen letter in her hand, and began to map out the geography of a life built on shadows. The house was too quiet. It was the kind of silence that preceded a storm, a heavy, artificial stillness that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. She knew her father would be coming. Michael Sterling didn't like loose ends, and a daughter with a recorder and a grudge was the ultimate loose end. Sure enough, the heavy thud of footsteps approached. 1, 2, 3. Sarah heard him counting the steps to her door. The handle turned, but the lock held. A moment later, the click of a master key echoed in the small space. Michael stepped in, leaving the door wide open. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was far worse. He leaned against the doorframe, checking his watch. "Sarah," he said, his voice smooth and paternal. We need to talk about your future. This behavior, the whispering into the lapel, the physical outbursts, it's becoming a liability. A liability to what, Dad? Your narrative? Sarah stood her ground. Her hand tightened around the recorder. Michael stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne, something woodsy and cold, filled her lungs. Your mother was quite unwell at the end, Sarah. Her mind was a bit of a maze. I fear you've inherited her fragility. Pathological grief is a recognized condition. It can lead to delusions, to dangerous behavior. The threat was clear, wrapped in the velvet of medical concern. Are you threatening to commit me? I'm suggesting that you need professional help. A quiet place where you can process your loss without disrupting the lives of those around you. He tapped his watch face. Tap, tap, tap. If you continue to harass Diane, if you continue to play this game of investigator, I will have no choice but to petition for a psychiatric evaluation. For your own safety, of course. Sarah felt the walls of the room closing in. Her father wasn't just lying, he was building a cage. Sarah is being threatened with institutionalization, she said into the recorder, her voice trembling but clear. The father is using the mother's illness as a pretext for silencing the witness. Michael's face hardened. The mask of the grieving widower slipped, revealing the cold, calculating prosecutor beneath. Put that ridiculous toy away. You're not a detective, Sarah. You're a daughter who is one step away from a very long, very quiet stay in a private ward. Choose your next move carefully. He turned and walked out, his voice drifting back from the hallway as he resumed his count. 8, 9, 10. Sarah sat in the dark long after he left. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. She couldn't stay in the main house. It was too exposed, too full of eyes. She needed more than just a utility bill. She needed to know who Diane Vance really was before her father could make her disappear. Under the cover of a moonless night, Sarah slipped out of the side entrance. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming lilies, a sensory riot that felt more like a funeral pyre than a garden. She moved through the shadows toward the guest house, a small stone cottage at the edge of the property where Diane had stayed before moving into the master suite. The guest house felt paranoid, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the dark woods. A single floodlight outside the front door flickered rhythmically, on, off, on, plunging the interior into shadow and then jerking it back into harsh, white light. Sarah's eyes struggled to adjust as she picked the lock. Inside, the air was stale and smelled of lemon water. Diane had moved most of her things, but she was a woman who discarded identities like old clothes. Sarah began to tear the place apart, checking the backs of drawers and the undersides of chairs. She found a small, locked vanity case tucked behind a stack of old magazines. She didn't have the key, so she used a heavy brass paperweight to smash the lock. Inside were dozens of photographs, not of Diane, but of the Sterling family. Photos of Sarah at the park, photos of Elena at the hospital, photos of Michael at his office. They were grainy, taken from a distance. Stalking photos. Diane hadn't just met Michael, she had hunted him. A floorboard creaked behind her. Sarah froze. The flickering floodlight outside cast a long, jagged shadow across the room. Looking for something, Miss Sarah? The voice was low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. Sarah turned to see the new groundskeeper, Scott Harrison, standing in the doorway. He was a man of thick neck and scarred knuckles, his military posture making him look like a wall of meat. He was straightening his tie, zip, 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 pulling it so tight his face turned a dull, angry red. "I'm authorized to be here, Scott." Sarah said, her voice steady despite the frantic thudding of her heart. "This is my family's property. Mr. Sterling told me to keep an eye on things, especially the guest house." Scott stepped into the room, his presence invading her space. He smelled of sweat and motor oil. "He said you might be confused, that you might try to take things that don't belong to you." "I'm leaving," Sarah said, clutching the vanity case to her chest. She tried to brush past him, but Scott moved with surprising speed, his hand clamping down on her arm like a vice. "I don't think so. We should wait for the master." His grip tightened, cold metal from his heavy ring biting into her skin. "Let go of me." Sarah struggled, but it was like fighting a mountain. Scott didn't move, his scowl deepening as he tightened his tie again. "Zip, zip, zip. You're making this difficult, Miss Sarah." "I don't like difficult." He began to pull her toward the door, his movements rough and efficient. Sarah realized then that Scott wasn't just a groundskeeper. He was a sentry. Her father hadn't hired him to trim the hedges. He had hired him to be a physical barrier. As they reached the muddy patch of garden just outside the guest house, Sarah saw her opening. The ground was slick from the evening's dew. She planted her heels and twisted, using her weight to throw Scott off balance. He stumbled, his boots sliding in the muck. Sarah reached for the first thing her hand could find, a heavy garden spade leaning against the stone wall. She swung it with everything she had. The flat of the metal blade caught Scott across the shoulder with a sickening thud. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to wrench her arm free. She didn't wait to see if he was getting up. She bolted into the darkness, the mud splashing against her legs, the vanity case heavy in her arms. She could hear him behind her, a rhythmic, heavy thumping of boots. But she knew the estate better than he did. She dove into the thicket of rhododendrons, the branches scratching at her face, the scent of crushed leaves filling her nose. She stayed perfectly still, her breath coming in shallow, silent sips. She heard Scott pass by, his breathing heavy, the rasp of his tie being tightened again. Zip, 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 echoing in the night air. When the sound of his footsteps faded, Sarah didn't go back to the main house. She headed for the one place she knew they wouldn't look, the attic. The climb up the back service stairs was a blur of adrenaline and pain. Every muscle in her body ached, and the bruise on her shoulder from the wardrobe had begun to turn a deep, angry purple. The attic was a place of oppressive, stagnant heat. The air a constant 95 degrees that made her clothes fuse to her skin within minutes. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges screaming in the silence. The ceiling sloped low and jagged, forcing her into a permanent, subservient hunch. She moved her flashlight beam across the piles of old trunks and forgotten furniture, the dust motes dancing like tiny ghosts in the light. In the center of the room, hanging from a rafter, was something that made Sarah's heart stop. It was Elena's wedding dress. The ivory silk was pristine, completely free of the thick dust that coated everything else in the room. It looked as though it had been placed there 5 minutes ago. But as Sarah got closer, she saw the horror of it. A woman was sitting on a low stool beneath the dress, her back to Sarah. The sound of rhythmic snipping filled the air, the sharp, metallic bite of scissors against silk. "Amanda?" Sarah whispered. The woman jumped, dropping a handful of lace. Amanda Taylor, the seamstress who had worked for the Sterlings for years, turned around. Her eyes were wide and darting, her fingers pricked with 100 tiny red dots. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice a frantic, nervous thing. "I'm so sorry, dear." She was speaking to the dress. "What are you doing to it, Amanda?" Sarah stepped forward, the heat of the attic pressing down on her like a physical weight. The mistress, she wants it changed. Amanda's hands moved over the silk, her fingers trembling. She says it's too small in the bust, too narrow in the hips. I have to take it apart. I have to make it fit her. A vow renewal? Sarah realized, the words tasting like ash. She's not just taking the ring. She's taking the wedding. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Amanda muttered again, this time to a mannequin that stood in the corner. She began to rip a seam, the sound of the silk tearing like a scream in the quiet room. Sarah reached out and touched the fabric. It felt cold, despite the heat of the attic. This was the final erasure. By the time the garden party arrived, there would be nothing left of Elena Sterling but a resized dress and a stolen ring. Sarah is in the attic, she whispered into her recorder, her voice flat and hollow. The seamstress is destroying the wedding dress. The subject is physically transforming into the decedent. The erasure is nearly complete. She looked at Amanda, whose spirit seemed as frayed as the lace in her lap. Don't do it, Amanda. You don't have to do this. I have to, Amanda whispered, her eyes fixed on her own pin-pricked fingers. She has my designs. She'll ruin me. I have to make it perfect for her. Sarah realized then that everyone in this house was a prisoner of Diane's ambition and Michael's silence. She looked at the vanity case she had stolen from the guest house. Inside, she found a hidden compartment. She pried it open and found a set of insurance documents, the original 1998 appraisal for the sapphire ring. The paper was yellowed, but the words were clear. Property of Elena Sterling, inherited from the estate of Catherine Miller. The proof. It hadn't been a gift from Michael to a mistress. It was a family heirloom, passed down through her mother's line. Michael had lied about the very origin of the ring to protect Diane's claim. A plan began to form in Sarah's mind, cold and sharp as a diamond. The garden party was in 2 days. The wealthy, the influential, the people Michael Sterling spent his whole life trying to impress. They would all be there. She wouldn't just tell the truth. She would record it. The day of the garden party arrived with a roar of caterers and the high-pitched, electric buzz of the hidden pest control grid. The garden was a chaotic riot of lilies and roses, the scent so thick it felt like a funeral shroud. Sarah watched from her window as the guests began to arrive. She saw the Miller family, Robert Miller, the man who refused to make left turns, pulling his oversized tweed blazer tight as he navigated the driveway. He was the key. He had been a witness to her mother's life, a man who knew the truth but was too afraid to speak it. Sarah moved through the house like a ghost. She had spent the last 48 hours mapping the estate's service tunnels, the narrow concrete passages that ran beneath the mansion. They were claustrophobic, the walls so close they brushed her shoulders, the sound of metallic dripping marking time like a heartbeat. She used the tunnels to reach her father's study. She knew the lock, a heavy, old-fashioned deadbolt that required a specific rhythm to pick. Click, clack, click. The door swung open. The study smelled of expensive beeswax and old secrets. Sarah went straight to the desk, her fingers flying over the drawers. She found the new appraisal, the forged one that claimed the ring was a gift for Diane. She placed it side by side with the 1998 original she had found in the attic. The signatures were a perfect match, but the dates were impossible. Sarah has the smoking gun, she whispered into her recorder. The forgery is confirmed. The subject and the father are co-conspirators in a multi-million-dollar fraud. Is that the record you're so fond of, Sarah? Diane was standing in the doorway. She was wearing a new gown, a pale cream silk that looked like a shroud. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back, her eyes predatory and cold. She was holding a heavy crystal decanter of lemon water, her fingers tracing the sharp edges of the glass. "It's over, Diane," Sarah said, holding up the two documents. "I have the original appraisal. I have the stalking photos. I know who you are." Diane laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "You have paper, Sarah. I have your father. I have this house. I have the ring." She stepped into the room, her presence filling the space. "Do you really think anyone will believe a disturbed girl over the pillar of the community? They'll believe the record." Diane's face twisted. She lunged forward, swinging the crystal decanter with a horizontal force that would have shattered Sarah's skull. Sarah dove to the left, the glass whistling past her ear and smashing into a bookshelf, showering the room in shards of crystal and the scent of warm lemon. "You little bitch!" Diane screamed, her voice losing its polished socialite lilt. She clawed at Sarah, her nails digging into Sarah's arm. Sarah fought back, her adrenaline screaming. She shoved Diane toward the desk, the two of them stumbling in a flurry of silk and paper. Sarah managed to break away, clutching the original appraisal to her chest. She sprinted for the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran through the mansion, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm. She could hear Diane behind her, screaming for Scott. Sarah burst through the French doors and onto the lawn, the bright sunlight of the garden party blinding her for a moment. She saw the crowd, the sea of white linen and floral prints. She saw Robert Miller standing by the rose bushes. "Mr. Miller," she shouted, her voice carrying over the buzz of the pest control grid. "I have proof. The ring." A hand caught her by the shoulder, spinning her around. It was Michael. His face was a mask of cold fury. He didn't look at the guests. He looked only at Sarah. "Give it to me," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "No, Dad. Look at this. It's the original appraisal. You lied. You forged the papers for her." Sarah held the document out, her hand shaking. "Tell them the truth. Tell them it was Mom's." Michael looked at the paper. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of something. Regret, maybe, or shame. Then, he reached out and snatched the document from her hands. He pulled a silver pocket lighter from his vest. With a flick of his thumb, a small, orange flame erupted. He held the 1998 appraisal to the fire. Sarah watched in horror as the yellowed paper curled and blackened. The words, "Property of Elena Sterling," vanished into a cloud of gray ash. "I know it was your mother's, Sarah," Michael said, his voice as calm as a surgeon's. "I'm the one who helped Diane find the right person to forge the new one. Did you really think I was being puppeted? I'm the one pulling the strings." The world went silent. The buzz of the garden, the chatter of the guests. It all faded into a dull roar. The betrayal was complete. Her father wasn't a victim of Diane's lies. He was the architect of them. "Sarah is witnessing the destruction of evidence," she whispered into her recorder. But her voice was a ghost. Michael leaned in close, his breath cold against her ear. "I've already called the police, Sarah. I've reported a trespassing and an assault on the groundskeeper. They'll be here in 5 minutes. And given your history of mental instability, I think a long-term evaluation is the only responsible course of action." He turned to the crowd, his face shifting instantly back into the mask of the grieving, concerned patriarch. "I'm so sorry, everyone. My daughter, she's having another episode. If you could please excuse us." 2 men in dark suits, security Michael had hired, stepped forward, taking Sarah by the arms. She didn't fight them. She couldn't. The weight of her father's cruelty was too heavy to lift. As they led her away, she heard the distant wail of sirens echoing through the driveway. She was trapped. She was framed. And the only evidence of her mother's life was a pile of ash on the manicured lawn. They dragged her toward the guest house, the flickering floodlight casting long, distorted shadows across the path. "Wait," Sarah said, her voice regaining a spark of clarity. "I need my medication. It's in the service tunnel entrance." The guards hesitated. They were just muscle, not familiar with the house's layout. "Make it quick," one of them grunted. Sarah led them to the small stone hatch near the rose garden. As they leaned down to look, she shoved the first guard with all her strength, sending him tumbling into the narrow concrete shaft. Before the second could react, she swung her heavy recorder, the professional-grade metal casing, against his temple. He slumped to the ground. Sarah didn't run away. She went down into the dark. The service tunnels felt like the inside of a rib cage. She crawled through the damp concrete, the sound of the police sirens getting louder, then fading as she moved deeper into the estate's foundation. She reached the technician's booth beneath the main terrace, the place where the tribute slideshow for the party was being managed. The booth was empty, the technician having gone to get a drink. Sarah's fingers flew over the controls. She didn't use jargon. She used her hands. She swapped the digital files, replacing Diane's Life with Michael presentation with the contents of the vanity case she had hidden in her jacket. The stalking photos, the utility bill from Ohio, the images of the two appraisals side by side, which she had photographed before Michael burned the original. She hit play. Outside, on the giant screen overlooking the garden, the image of Diane Vance, not as a socialite, but as a woman in a mugshot from 5 years ago, erupted into view. Then came the photos of Diane watching Elena through a hospital window. Then the forged documents. A hush fell over the garden, a silence so profound it was louder than the sirens. Sarah stepped out from the shadows and onto the terrace. She looked down at the crowd, at the horrified faces of the Millers, at the pale, trembling form of Diane, and finally, at her father. Michael Sterling stood frozen, his platinum watch glinting in the sun. For the first time in his life, he had lost count of the steps. Sarah walked down the stairs, 1, 2, 3. Her voice clear and resonant, no longer whispering into a lapel. "The record is public now, Father. You can burn the paper, but you can't burn the truth." She walked straight to Diane, who was huddled in her resized wedding dress, looking small and fraudulent. Sarah reached out and took Diane's hand. She didn't pull. She simply waited. With the eyes of the entire county on her, Diane slowly slid the sapphire ring off her finger and placed it in Sarah's palm. The stone was cold, but it felt right. Sarah looked at her father. He looked old. He looked like a man who had built a golden world on a foundation of sand. And the tide had finally come in. "I'm leaving," Sarah said. "And I'm taking the record with me." She walked through the gates of the Sterling estate, the sapphire ring glinting on her finger, a hard-won shield of her mother's true legacy. She didn't look back at the sirens or the ruined party. A few weeks later, Sarah sat in a small, sterile apartment in New York City. The blue LED streetlights outside washed the room in a cool, unnatural hue. She picked up her recorder, her thumb hovering over the button. "Sarah is in her new home," she said. Her voice was different now, less like a clock, more like a person. "The truth has been verified. The inheritance is secure. The record is complete." She looked at the sapphire ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry anymore. It was a reminder that even in a world of shadows and lies, some things are too bright to be hidden. She turned off the recorder, and for the first time in 5 years, she let the silence be enough.